This is chapter 20 of The God Boy by Ian Cross. Nothing really bad ever happened to me, unless you count having a tooth out or cutting a foot on a broken bottle. I had never really been knocked around. I dare say that bashing Bloody Jack gave me was the most I had ever been hurt. The dentist, when he took my back tooth out, certainly made me give an almighty yell, which scared the daylights out of him, and made a woman in the waiting room burst out crying, as though her tooth was coming out too. The dentist got that much out of me, yet he didn't actually hurt. What caused me to yell was the crunching noise as he yanked. As I was only 10 years old then, I thought for a minute that the side of my face was cracking off, so I yelled blue murder. When he got the tooth out, he had to leave me straight away to go and fix the woman. I could hear her blubbing away, so I got out of the chair and poked my head into the waiting room before the nurse could stop me, and tried to tell her nothing awful had happened. Only my mouth got full of blood, and I swallowed and choked on it, and then heaved a whole lot out of it onto the carpet. The woman nearly had a fit and cleared out altogether. The dentist wasn't too pleased, and said if there were many more kids like me, he would be driven out of business. Mum had left me there to go and do some shopping, and when she came back the dentist told her that too, although the nurse had cleaned up the blood and stuff by then, so the situation didn't look as bad as it had been. There are still scars on the bottom of my right foot where I jumped on a broken bottle. That was years ago now, so the cuts must have been pretty bad. And that didn't hurt so very much. It was more the idea that my foot might be worse than it looked that upset me. That was the time Molly was home. We were home by ourselves for the afternoon, and she tore up practically a whole bedsheet and bound my foot and my leg up to my knee. She kept tying the strips around and round, so businesslike and fussy, and looking so proud that I let her go ahead because I could see that she was quite pleased with me for having the accident. When I say that nothing really bad happened to me, I am thinking of things like that. I was pretty lucky there. I mention this so that it doesn't appear that I'm moaning all the time. On the other hand, I do think I had awfully bad luck, the type of things that don't hurt your body, but just worry you stiff. And if I had my choice, I would rather have had my leg broken once or twice, or an eye knocked out, or even got polio. Perhaps a kid who has had such things go wrong with him would think I was better off, so there's no telling really. But when I got out of the car with Sister Angela and saw the woman beckoning to us, it was worse than a broken leg could ever be. She in this costume like a sack, and with one hand on her hip, standing on top of the steps, looking as though she owned the place. She had a face like half-cooked meat. I've never hated anybody in my life as much as I hated her. As soon as I saw her, I wanted to kick her to pieces or stamp on her till she screamed. "What's she doing here, sister?" I asked. Sister Angela put her arm around my shoulder and said, "Come along with me, Jimmy, and be a brave boy," and sort of pushed me down the path. "Where's my mother?" I said. My voice zigzagged around so much I felt ashamed. The woman said, "Is he all right?" "Yes," Sister said. She had brown shoes on and thick brown stockings, and was more like a man who played football. She reached back and opened the door and stood there with one hand out and said, "Come on in then. You won't be able to keep him here for very long. I think it's a mistake," but she wouldn't lift a finger until we promised. "You get out of here," I said to her. "This is not your house, and you can just get out of it." And then Sister was on her knees beside me, right on the gravel, dropping straight down, without hitching or messing with her robes, her hand on my shoulder, scratching away as though she thought I might be itching. "Jimmy, you must be a brave boy, and you must be a good boy. I'll stay with you all the while. I'm taking you in to see your mother. Please be a brave and good boy." Her voice was zigzagging too. "Couldn't I go down to the police station?" I said. "What's it to do with her anyway? This is not her house. She can't come hanging around here because I've got into trouble, can she?" "She's here to help, Jimmy. She's here to help your mother, and you'll never go to the police station." "They're going to put me in jail, aren't they?" There was a clop clop down the stairs, and the woman crouched down with her red and brown face up against mine and said, "Your mummy told me to come out and watch for you. I'm your mummy's friend, see? Nothing's going to happen to you because you're a good little boy, see? And the police never touch good little boys." "I want to see my mother," I yelled at them. That did it. Even the woman shut up. They both tapped me up the steps with their hands and followed me across the porch and up the passage. The kitchen door was open and I saw all the unwashed breakfast dishes on the sink and the teapot standing on the table with its lid off, and the stove fire out. I stopped, but the woman tapped me forward again and said, "Your mother is waiting for you in the lounge." "Keep away from me, all of you," I said, and ran up the passage, pulled the door open, ducked in, and slammed it behind me. Mum was leaning right back in the big chair, and must have been nearly asleep, for she sat up with a jerk. She was still the same, only her eyes weren't so queer, but her face was white and those funny lines were all sagging over it. She looked as though she had too much skin. "It's all because of me, isn't it?" I said. "It's my fault, isn't it?" She held out her arms. I went across and she gave me a hug that squeezed the breath out of me, at the same time rubbing her face across the top of my head so hard it nearly hurt. "I'm sorry, son. Remember that when you grow up." She whispered that as she pushed me away from her again. "I wouldn't be surprised if I've got cancer or some whopping tropical fever," I said. "It's all happened because I was sick, Mum. They can't blame me because I was sick. My brain was all mucked up." "Jimmy, don't talk like that." "I fainted at school, Mum. Honest. Bang over I went. Sister will tell you." "Don't gabble away like that, son," she said, not even caring. "But the Hindu and Bloody Jack, Mum." I did my best to talk slow. "It wasn't really my fault. Not if I'm sick and have to be operated on, even if I did swear at that old woman over the fence." "Your father's gone away, son. That's what I want to tell you. I've got to go too. You'll have to live with the sisters at the convent for a while." "What?" I sort of hiccuped over her. Honestly, I had been so steamed up about the idea of being in trouble that I didn't hear right the first time, so she repeated herself. It was like the time I learned the wrong oral spelling lesson off by heart, and then got flattened properly when Sister asked me to spell conceit. Mum was staring at me, still looking as though she hadn't had any sleep for a year, and talking to me about something I'd never dreamed of. I just stood there as though my tongue was in a knot. "You'll stay in the convent like Molly, Jimmy," she said. Even now I can hear her talking, and remember every word she said, even what I said myself. And at nights before I go to sleep, I often listen to it over and over again. I suppose because at the time I didn't feel much or understand, and I'm still trying to catch up, so to speak. "Where's Dad gone?" I asked her. "He's gone, that's all. Don't ask me. There's a new job, that's it, and he's gone away for that. A long, long way away. You'll understand when you grow up, Jimmy. I'm sorry." "I don't want to go anywhere, Mum. Not without you and Dad." "I don't want to leave you either, Jimmy. I have to, though, you see. We all have to do things we don't want to. I'm sorry. You're a big boy now, aren't you? And I'll get back soon and take you, and perhaps you and Molly and me, all the three of us, will go somewhere else." "Why somewhere else?" "We don't live in one place all our lives. Please don't ask questions. Say you'll be a good boy and pray for Mummy." "Where's Dad?" "I told you where he is, son. Please don't ask questions. I'll give you a sixpence and you can buy yourself an ice cream on the way home. There'll be other children in the home, and the sisters will look after you." "Where did he go? And why didn't he say goodbye to me?" "To a new job, a long way away. I told you, he left early. I've put all the clothes you'll need in a case, and the rest of your gear will be sent on after you. And in a little while, Mummy will come for you, and we'll go away together. It won't be long either. You'll like living in the home with all the other boys and girls. It's not far from Wellington. Molly will come out to see you." "I don't want to. I won't." "Jimmy, Jimmy, you'll like it fine. Can't you see? It has to be. Mummy doesn't want you to go away. It's not my fault, son. I've done my best. I'll be thinking of you all the time. It's not my fault. I tried to put up with so many terrible things, things you'll never know. And it's not my fault, God knows. I couldn't stand it any longer, Jimmy, and nobody will blame me when they know." "What are you talking about, Mum?" She stood up and walked over to the fireplace. She put both her hands on the mantelpiece and said, "Be a good boy, won't you, son?" "I'm a bit bad, I suppose, but not that bad," I said. From upstairs came a bumping sound, and then feet trampled around. Mum put her hand on the little brass statue of the fat Chinaman and rattled it on the mantelpiece. The thumpings went on, and she didn't move, but just stood there, as though she would never be able to speak again. I didn't give a darn about the house, really. Yet everything in that lounge seemed to be worth a heck of a lot. Even the bare old carpet, the old writing bureau with the wriggling carvings on it, all the stuff, even the old junk that was in there, including that picture of the whopping big stag. Honestly, I've never felt anything was worth that much, not even piles of £5 notes. And here I was getting the feeling about stuff I wouldn't have given you twopence for the day before. Then the bumping stopped, and there was no noise except the rattle of the fat Chinaman. "What's happened, Mum? Who's upstairs?" She turned around and faced me, and her face was starting to screw up, as if she was wild. "Don't ask any more questions, Jimmy," she said. "I've told you all a little boy needs to know. You'll have to go now." "Don't you worry about me being sick with disease and fainting?" I blubbed at her. "You can't let them put me in jail." "Nobody is going to put you in jail. Don't talk nonsense, son. Only go with sister, and I'll see you soon. It won't be long." I stopped being me then. The mad feeling that I had when I started throwing stones the day before blew up inside me. "What are you doing to me?" I shouted as she came toward me, with arms stretched out. I closed my eyes and the shout came again. "What are you doing to me?" And then she had lifted me right off my feet and was saying, "Quiet, quiet, please, please, please." I was held like that for a long time, and she kept repeating "please, please," until another hand pulled at my shoulder, and the voice of the woman said very loudly, "Time is getting on, Mrs. Sullivan. Only a few minutes. That was our agreement, wasn't it?" "I'll come for you soon, Jimmy," Mum said. Her arms loosened around me, and I slid down her legs till my feet were on the floor. "It's nearly midday," the woman said. I put my arms around Mum's waist and held my face there. "Oh my God, what have I done to deserve all this?" she said. "Remember our agreement," the woman said. "I told you what would happen." They were Mum's hands that came behind her back and pulled my hands away, and then took my wrists and lifted my arms right up above my head and level with her shoulders. I didn't look at her, just held my arms stiff. "Don't be silly, son," she said, and then mumbled something I couldn't hear. The woman's hands took my arms, so I let them drop. I stared at the floor all the time. "Goodbye, Jimmy," Mum said. "Say goodbye to your mother, and I'll take you out to the nun," said the woman. Mum's hands were on my shoulders now, and she leaned on them as she bent down and kissed me on the forehead. I started to look up and saw the long red scratch on her arm again, and my neck was so stiff that I couldn't move my head. I couldn't look at her. "Goodbye, son," Mum said. "Be a brave man." "He'll be all right, Mrs. Sullivan," the woman said. And then right against my ear she went on. "Don't sulk, sonny. Say goodbye to your mother." "Oh my God," said Mum, sounding as though her mouth couldn't open properly. I turned right around into the sack of the woman's skirt and pushed past her, and there at the door was the black robe of Sister Angela, and splitting down the middle of it were the rosary beads hanging from the crucifix at her waist. I walked over, and Sister's hand touched my cheek. "Goodbye, Mum," I said. "Goodbye, Jimmy," she said from behind me. I couldn't look at her, though, and went on out into the passage. Sister Angela whispered, "Down to your room, Jimmy." Why Mum had been so terrible to me, I didn't know. There she was, back in the lounge with that woman, somebody I had never even seen before, and neither of them wanted me. The whole house was cold and dusty and creaking as though it was filling up with ghosts, while I was being shoveled out of the way as quickly as possible. The sun was beating in the open front door, and its light was shooting up the passage, making dust in the air look like little bits of fire. Yet it was cold, and Sister Angela looked frightened, and her mouth was moving like a rabbit's eating grass. "Down to your room, Jimmy," she said again, as I stood looking around. She took my hand and held it tightly, yet she didn't move either. There were more bumps upstairs. This time I could tell they were footsteps. From somewhere about us there was a moaning, almost like a dog howling, that faded as soon as it started and then stopped. It stopped, yet I knew it was still going on. Only nobody was being allowed to hear it. I tugged Sister's hand and led her down to my room, not caring, and said to her, "Leave me alone. Leave me alone. Everybody leave me alone." She stepped back, nodding her head. "In a minute we'll go, Jimmy." "I'll tell them we are ready to leave." She could hardly speak. Really, I felt sorry for her. I was tougher than she was. She closed the door as she went out. My bed hadn't been made, So I pulled the blankets halfway up, shook the pillow out, smoothed it down, and then settled the blankets right on top of the bed over the pillow. The top blanket was thick and covered with the black and red lines that made up squares, so I was careful to straighten it so that the squares were all in a line. There was an open suitcase on the floor at the foot of the bed, which I pulled out to the centre of the room. I couldn't help noticing that Mum had packed my clothes in all the way, so I tidied up the pyjamas and shirts on top in case anybody at the home noticed. There was a chest of drawers next to my bed, and I checked in each drawer to make sure nothing was forgotten that I really wanted. There was a fair amount of junk in the bottom drawer, but I only took an old hourglass in a wooden frame that I had found years before in a rubbish tip. I timed it once, and the sand ran from one end to the other in 50 minutes. Anyway, I stuffed it down into the bottom of the old case, closed the lid and snapped the locks, and then sat on top of it. My bedroom was a neat room, with not much in it besides the bed and chest of drawers, which Dad had whitewashed the same time as he had the lounge walls. A mirror that was cracked in one corner where I hid it, with the hairbrush I had thrown at a white butterfly that had flown in the window. Funny, Mum had never noticed that crack. A little table that rocked when you put your elbows on it, and an old chest in which I kept all my books. There were a couple of old holy pictures on the walls too, not that I really wanted them there. When I was 7 or 8, I was keen on the Virgin Mary and stuck one picture of her on each side of the room, and I never actually felt like taking them down again, even though I didn't really want them up there any longer. It was a good room, yet I didn't feel sorry that I was leaving it. Even thinking about the mouse hole in the corner where I used to stuff my bag of marbles didn't make me get sloppy. I sat in my suitcase half dreaming until I slowly started to wake up. My heart began to thump, and it began to get hard for me to breathe. I went across to the window. The sun was bright and the bit of lawn in front dry and warm. The 2 cars were parked on the road. 2 cars. One was the one that had brought me home with Sister Angela, and the other was a long black job, bigger than any car I'd ever seen. I shoved my face up hard against the window and looked out at an angle. There was a policeman standing on the path. He moved out a bit, slowly at first, looking back over his shoulder and moving his lips as though he was talking to somebody. His hands were the size of footballs, and the tops of his arms were bursting tight against his sleeves, making them look as though they were pumped tight with air. And he had no neck at all. There were 2 or 3 great rings of red fat under his chin that hid his collar, and then his shoulders bunched out like thundering great hills that had come up from his waist. He didn't have a fat belly either, and his legs were long. He was all muscles and beef up top, and only average down below. He finished talking and then walked up the path and through the gate and untied my bike from the back of the car. He was so strong that he lifted it up in the air and lowered it to the ground with one hand on the bar, and then he pushed it back down the path with 2 fingers resting on the middle of the handlebars. Really, my mind had not been working at all well, because it was not till I saw the policeman with that bike that I realised that all the trouble was not about what I had done the day before. It was something about Mum and Dad.